create figures for your reports, for your dissertations. So hopefully there'll be some useful tips in here for many of your modules. So I'm going to walk you through how to create nice figures for force data specifically. So you can see here I've got a column with time in it, and then I've got a column with our vertical force in it. And this is all the raw data that I'm working from. The first thing I will do though is actually create a new file and call this analyzed. So this is a new spreadsheet, and this is the spreadsheet that I'm going to manipulate the data in. So that means that I do not touch the raw data at all. So I've always got that as a backup file that I can go back to in case something happens with this analyzed file. So if I did a quick plot of the vertical force, we can see that there is a big gap here where nothing is happening, nothing is stood on the plate. Let me just enlarge that as well. A really long period where nothing is happening. Then, as the individual, because this is a drop jump specifically, as the individual steps off the block and hits the plate the first time, we can see this big impact happening in contact time. They then jump back into the air for the reactive part of the drop jump, and then they land for a second time on the plate. And that's this second phase here, where you can see there's a much higher landing force going on, as denoted by this peak here, and then they come to a period of stability on the plate. So a period of nothing happening, and then we've got the first impact, then they're in the air again, and then the second impact. And what we've seen in the past is that when people present data, they'll just present it like this. So they'll give us all of the data they have. And what I want to show is how I would expect you to present some of this data, specifically if we were just honing in on the first contact. This is what I would expect you to do to your data and present it. So the first things first is, how do we determine when the person is on the plate? Well, to do that we need to set a threshold. So this is a threshold that the force must exceed for us to say that plate is active and there is now someone on that plate. So you can see just visually there is a period where it hovers around 0 here, and then they're on the plate. So we do tend to use a threshold of around 20 newtons. So I'm just going to pop that in there. 20 newtons is our threshold. I'm also going to fill in our frequency. So over here I can see that the first time point is 0.001. So if I want to determine at what frequency was this data being sampled, I can just do 1 divided by 0.001. So, as you can see here, I now have a frequency of 1000 Hertz. That means the force data was collected at 1000 frames per second. And we're going to use that in a moment when we have to repopulate our time. Okay, so I'm now going to teach you about the if function. I'm going to first of all call a cell here threshold check, and this is just to check whether the data goes above my threshold of 20 newtons or not. So the if function, first of all we need to put an equals in the column before we start the function. Then we type if, then we open the brackets. And you'll see it comes up with what it is expecting to find in that function. And the first bit says logical test. So this is if our force is greater than 20. That's what we're trying to test here. So I'm going to select my force column, so the first row, B3, if that is greater than 20. So I'm going to type in the number 20. If that is true, so using that greater, that's what that little arrow there means, greater than 20. And then I'm going to put a comma. That means that is the end of that logical test. If my force is greater than 20, I want it to tell me there has been contact with the plate. So I'm just going to type in the word contact. And you have to use quotation marks. When you're typing in a word, you have to put quotation marks around it so that Excel knows to treat it as a word. So if the force is greater than 20, tell me it is by placing contact in the C column. And then I'm going to put another comma, and you can see it moves over to what is the value if my statement here is false. So when the force is less than 20, what do I want it to tell me? Well, I'm just going to put a 0 in here, and it's a number, so I don't need to put quotation marks around it, because Excel will treat a number as a number. I want it to just put 0, and then I'm going to close brackets. And then that's all you need for the formula. It's a complete formula. So equals, if, put our statement in, the force is greater than 20, tell me by saying there's been contact with the plate. If it's not true, give me a 0. And then I'll just press enter. So we can see for the first row, it's giving me a 0 value because the force is minus 1.24, and that's less than 20. Now you can see from the figure here that we've got over 9,000 rows of data. I'm not going to drag this formula down. I'm not going to copy and paste this formula into 9,000 rows. I'm going to teach you a little trick that you can do. So when you hover over your selected cell, so the selected cell is green, and then you just go into the corner, it will come up with a black cross mark. And that denotes that you can now automatically fill that column. So when the little black cross mark comes up, just double click, and the formula will copy all the way down your data. And you can see it's gone all the way down, 0, 0, 0s. And if we keep scrolling for quite a while, because there's quite a period of no force in this data, we will eventually get to the point where we start seeing contact. And here it is. So it's now telling me there is contact with the plate because the force has gone over 20 newtons. So we can just see here it went from 6.61 force to 50, and that's when we found a change there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that row, and I'm going to delete all of the data that I don't need. So essentially, as we can see from the time column, it's 7 seconds worth of data that I do not need in my figure. So I'm going to use Control and Shift to go back to the beginning of the spreadsheet. So I'm going to do that again for you. So when you're at a data point, go all the way back down again, there we go. So here's my data point, this is the row. I want to go back to the top of my spreadsheet, that is over 7,000 rows away. I'm going to press Control, Shift, and then up, the up arrow on my keyboard, and it will jump to the top of the data. And then I'm just going to make sure that I'm actually selecting. So I'm going to do that again for you. Go back to the force data, back to the row that I'm interested in, which is, here we go. So I'm going to press Control and Shift, and then just the up key on my keyboard, and it will go all the way to the top. And then if I just hold down Shift and use the down arrow once more, it will just select my data that I want. And then I'm quite simply going to right click and press delete, and it will delete all of the rows that I don't need. As you can see, it's also deleted our figure, but that's okay because we're going to replot that. So now we're going to first though repopulate our time column. So you can see it starts at 7.1 seconds, but we want to start at 0. So we're going to type in 0, and then here we're going to do a quick little formula where we add the previous time and then add 1 divided by our frequency, and that will give us our time point. So we've just added the time point before to our sampling frequency, and then we're going to use our little trick again to repopulate the rest of the time, and now we've got a time column that starts at 0 when the first contact was made. So let's go ahead now and plot just the first contact phase. So I'm going to scroll all the way down until my contacts disappear and I get 0 again, so that's here. And I'm going to use the scatter plot. So if you go on the Insert tab and Scatter, and I'm going to use the scatter with smooth lines rather than scatter just with the points, okay? Because we want actually a nice smooth force trace with all of the points joined together. And here we have it. So this is our nice smooth force trace. You can see we've got our force along the y-axis, and then at the moment just on a count of frames. So the first thing we're going to do is input our x values. So if you right click on the chart, you can use select data, and then your x values here, we're just going to go back to our data and select our time. Press enter. So we have our x values and our y values, and now the time has changed. So we've got a more of a sensible time period going on. Now some people might just leave it like this, but I'm going to talk you through how we can just tidy this up and put some proper axis titles on this as well. So we don't need the chart title, because remember when you put these into reports or your dissertation you have a figure caption, so we can get rid of the chart title. We can also get rid of these grid lines, because the grid lines are actually just more confusing than anything else. So you can just highlight them and then click delete on your keyboard. So we just get rid of those. Now let's add the axis titles. You always need to make sure you have these titles so that someone can pick up your figure and know exactly what it is. So you can just go on add chart element, add axis title. We'll do the horizontal, so these are x values first. So you can see it pops up, and I'm going to just call this one time. Make sure I put the units, so the units are seconds. So you can see that the contact phase was just over 0.35 seconds, so a third of a second. I'm now going to go to my vertical, so our y axis, and again I'm just going to type in our name, which is force and newtons. Now the text is quite small, so a quick trick for you, if you've got the whole of the figure highlighted, so clicking on the figure so this active box comes around it, we can just change all of the text size at once. So I can just increase this to at least font 20. So we've changed all of the font size in our figure. So we can go as big as we want or as small as we want. So let's, for the sake of the video, keep it at 14. And I'm also going to change it to Arial font just because that's a little bit nicer to read. And now I'm going to deal with the axes and the data. We prefer to have the data colour, the line in this example, in black rather than blue, so that if this does get printed at some stage, we don't need to worry about the colours of the figure because it's already in black. So we can just highlight our data and then click on format and the pen here. We can also make the line a bit thicker if we wanted to. And we can do the same with the axes bars as well. So we can make these axes bars, rather than grey, we can do them as black. And if you double click the x-axis, a little format box should hopefully pop up. I'm working on a Mac, but it should also work in Windows. And we can just go over to the bucket symbol, click on solid line, and I'm going to make that a black solid line, so just make sure that's ticked, and I'm going to put it as 1.5. I'm also going to go in back to the bar column here, and I'm going to add tick marks, and I'm going to add major tick marks on the outside, and you can see it's just put in where we've got our numbers, it's just put a little line in. So we can see on the y-axis here we don't have tick marks yet, so we're going to add those. So we'll just add a little line where our numbers are. So if we click on the y-axis, keep our format box open, and then just click outside. And you can see there they are, they're quite faint. Let me just increase the line size again. So black line 1.5. And then we have it. We have a figure that will be good enough to put into your dissertations or your reports. One final thing as well, I would also get rid of the box around the data. So if you click on the whole figure, double click and then go no line for no border, it means when you copy and paste it into Word, it won't have a grey box around the whole figure. So there, that's the end of the tutorial. So a nice smooth force trace with the region of interest. In this example it was the first contact, with a fully formatted axes and font size.